Chris Ilitch, the owner of the team, actually spoke up kind of in a defensive manner as addressing issues that I brought up last week with you, that the perception of the Detroit Tigers might be that they are cheap, or that specifically Chris Ilitch is cheap and maybe his dad wasn't so much. You and I talked briefly last week about specifically Lawrence Holmes on Score last week. Thought was putting the Tigers in the same boat with the Pittsburgh Pirates is one of those teams that always just pockets revenue sharing money and doesn't spend and just, doesn't try to win. I'm like, well, that is not the history of the Tigers whatsoever. They've spent more on free agents than the White Sox ever have. And in fact, in this offseason, they've spent more than the White Sox ever have. So I think specifically, though, Chris Ilitch is trying to come out from underneath the shadow of his successful father. The criticism has come in certainly in the few years since Mike Ilitch has died. The Tigers have not been a contending team, and they have not spent a whole lot on free agents, but there kind of really isn't a reason to spend a whole lot of money on a team that really spent way too much for 20 years and eventually has the hangover and has to clean up the party after it's over and has to rebuild. And it's been a slower than hoped for process, but we are starting to see them come out of that, and we are starting to see them spend the money accordingly, which makes sense to me. They spent over $230 million on free agents now this offseason. So the other part of his defensive stance today, and I guess why he felt he needed to speak to the media, which you don't often see with owners, was the news that came out during the lockout that he was one of the four owners that came out against raising the CBT at all. It was at 210 million. He voted against it being 220 million even. And his argument today was that's noise. He's saying that's not even true, wherever that report came from. And he points to the fact that he did, in fact, in truth, voted for our current collective bargaining agreement, as that was reported, and accurately so, that it was unanimous. All owners agreed to raise the CBT to $230 million, $20 million over what it was, and subsequently higher. So whether he did or didn't, there may not have even been a formal vote. All of those things are questionable before we actually had a new collective bargaining agreement. We don't know that he was really one of the four or how that worked out. I think he probably was. I think there might be reasons for that beyond being cheap, which would be the surface level argument against him. You could say the owners were kind of fighting amongst themselves. Some teams had no problems with it going way up. Other teams wanted to make sure total salaries were going to be kind of compressed into a smaller area. And I think the teams we root for in the AL Central are kind of in the same boat there, where the New York Mets might not give a fuck. The Dodgers might not give a fuck. The Yankees might not give a fuck how much they spend. So I think that kind of speaks more towards not necessarily the owners against the players at that moment. It was the owners against the owners, two factions of the owners going at each other. So I don't know. I could be wrong about all that. I still think it's unfair to judge Chris Ilitch, especially to call him cheap after he's spent quite a bit of money in this offseason alone. I almost think this is kind of back to our discussion about dumb fans or Twitter and fans in general. I think a lot of Tiger fans get on Twitter and forget that it was just 3 months ago that he spent all this money. If we had just got Javi Baez this week for $140 million in 6 years, if we had just gotten Eduardo Rodriguez for 5 years and $77 million this week, I don't think Tigers fans would be complaining that Chris Ilitch was cheap. But it happened 3 months ago, so it goes out of their mind, and it doesn't fit their narrative that we didn't get Carlos Correa like everyone hoped for. So I think it's kind of spoiled fans just acting like children. So
I guess back to what Ilitch said.
Yeah,
the loophole in what he said could be he was noted as voting against it pre, like one of the rounds prior to the final agreement, which he may have voted for it in the final agreement.
That is exactly what he's saying. He's saying he voted for the $230 million agreement that we have
Right,
because
but
it's unanimous. So
yeah,
he's saying the rest of it is all bullshit.
but the story came out that he voted to, it was on March 4th when it was said that he voted against it, which was when, and then the union rejected the league's proposal anyway. So it's all I'm saying, it doesn't matter really all that much at the end of the day. But it was after we were talking about, it was funny because it was after we were talking about, we don't really know about Chris Ilitch. We know his dad liked to spend money. Yeah. And then that report came out the next day, and then we still didn't have baseball for another week and a half. And then finally the agreement was signed. So after a couple more rounds of changes. So yeah, sure, he did vote again. He did vote for it in the final round, but he may have voted against it 2 rounds earlier.
I think he probably did. He's not flat out denying that. He called that noise. He's saying that nobody really knows what happened in those votes, which is fine. I think he might be lying about that. Whatever. I think that what's notable about this is that he felt compelled to talk to the media about it today, one way or the other. He's offended or concerned about that perception.
Yeah, he's concerned about the perception.
Yeah, so I think that's what's notable about this, that he's bothering to even talk, because you don't hear owners talk very often at all at any point, let alone at this point, and talk about finances. So maybe he's a bit thin-skinned. Maybe he's worried about his own personal brand. I don't know. I don't think it really matters, because if the Tigers win, he's going to be the city's hero. If the Tigers don't, he's going to be a problem no matter what. So
yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, none of our owners are angels, so who whatever.
Unless you're Artie Moreno, who also
voted against. True, but he voted against it.
Yeah, that was the other funny part of that story with the four.
The richest one voted against it, right? Is he the richest, or is the Mets owner the richest now?
Mets is well, he's not even. There's one other that's richer than Stephen Cohen, I think. Maybe not, but Artie Moreno's up there. So that was what was also remarkable about the idea that he didn't want the CBT to go up anymore. So there's weird stuff with that vote, whether it was accurate reporting, inaccurate, whether it was a misunderstood. It's strange, and it all really doesn't matter when it comes down to it. We have a new collective bargaining agreement with a higher CBT. So.
Word Hole Media.